The restaurant was called the Golden Note, and it sat on one of those fancy streets in downtown Chicago, where even the air seemed expensive. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, white tablecloths covered every table, and every single night, a live jazz band played soft music while rich people ate meals that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. Maria had been working there for 3 years. 3 long years of carrying heavy plates, forcing smiles, and pretending she didn't notice when customers treated her like she was invisible. She was 32 years old, and this was her life now. This was what her dreams had become, but nobody at that restaurant knew her real story. Nobody knew what she had been before she put on that black apron and started taking orders. See, Maria wasn't born in America. She grew up in a small town in the Philippines, in a house with a leaky roof and walls that shook whenever a storm came through. Her family didn't have much. Her father worked at a factory. Her mother sold vegetables at the local market. They barely had enough money for food, let alone anything extra. But there was one thing in that tiny house that didn't belong there. One thing that seemed almost magical compared to everything else around it. An old piano. It had belonged to Maria's grandmother, and it sat in the corner of their living room like a quiet promise of something bigger. Maria touched those keys for the first time when she was 4 years old. And something inside her just clicked. It was like the piano had been waiting for her all along. She didn't need anyone to teach her at first. She just played. She listened to songs on the radio and figured out how to copy them. She made up her own melodies. Her tiny fingers moved across those keys like they had been doing it for 100 years. By the time she was 10, everyone in town knew about the little girl who could play piano like nobody they had ever seen. People would walk by her house just to listen through the windows. Her mother would cry sometimes, watching her play. Not from sadness, from wonder. From the strange feeling of watching your child do something that seems almost impossible. When Maria was 15, a teacher from a big music school in Manila happened to visit her town. Someone told him about the girl with the magic hands. He didn't believe it at first. He had heard stories like that before, and they were usually exaggerated. But he agreed to listen anyway. Maria played for him that afternoon in her family's small living room. She played a piece by Chopin, one of the most difficult compositions ever written for piano. When she finished, the teacher didn't say anything for a long time. He just sat there with his mouth slightly open, like he had just witnessed something he couldn't explain. A week later, Maria received a full scholarship to the Manila Conservatory of Music. It was the most prestigious music school in the country. Students from wealthy families competed for years to get in. And here was this girl from a poor village, getting a free ride because her talent was simply undeniable. Those next few years were the happiest of Maria's life. She lived in a dormitory with other music students. She practiced for 8 hours a day, sometimes more. Her professors called her extraordinary. They said she had something that couldn't be taught. Technical skill, yes, but also soul. When Maria played, you didn't just hear the notes, you felt them. They crawled inside your chest and made you remember things you had forgotten, made you feel things you had buried. Everyone said she was going to be famous. Everyone said she would play in concert halls across the world. Maria believed them. She let herself dream big, beautiful dreams. She imagined herself on stage in Vienna, in Paris, in New York. She imagined her parents sitting in the front row, crying those same tears of wonder. But life doesn't always care about our dreams. It happened when Maria was 21, just a few months before her graduation. Her father got sick. Really sick. The kind of sick that needs expensive treatments and long hospital stays. The kind of sick that drains a family's savings in weeks. Maria's mother called her, crying so hard she could barely speak. They had no money left. They had borrowed from everyone they knew. And it still wasn't enough. Maria didn't think twice. She dropped out of school, sold everything she owned, and flew back home. She took care of her father for the next year, working whatever job she could find during the day and sitting by his hospital bed at night. She cleaned houses. She worked at a laundromat. She did anything and everything to help pay those medical bills. Her father passed away on a rainy Tuesday morning. Maria was holding his hand when it happened. He looked at her with tired eyes and whispered that he was sorry. Sorry for getting sick. Sorry for ruining her future. She told him not to say that. She told him she would be fine. She told him she loved him. After the funeral, Maria looked at what was left of her life and made a decision. There was nothing left for her there anymore. Her mother had moved in with relatives. The piano in their old house had been sold to pay debts. Everything that connected her to music was gone. She applied for a visa to America. She had a distant cousin in Chicago who said she could stay on the couch until she found her feet. So Maria packed one small suitcase, boarded a plane, and left everything behind. That was 11 years ago. Now, here she was, a waitress in a fancy restaurant, carrying plates of food that she couldn't afford to eat, smiling at people who looked right through her like she wasn't even there. The hardest part wasn't the work. Maria didn't mind working hard. She had been doing it her whole life. The hardest part was the piano on the stage. Every night, she had to walk past it. This beautiful grand piano, black and shining under the spotlight. A hired pianist would play during dinner service, and Maria would carry plates back and forth while the music filled the room. And every single note felt like a small knife in her heart. She tried not to listen. She tried to focus on the orders, the customers, the tips she needed to pay her rent. But music doesn't work like that. You can't just turn it off. It finds you. It reaches inside you and grabs hold of something you thought you had buried. Some nights, after everyone had left and the restaurant was dark and quiet, Maria would sit at that piano. She would wait until the cleaning crew finished and the manager locked up. Then she would use her key to slip back inside, just for an hour, sometimes 2, and she would play. In the darkness of that empty restaurant, with nobody watching and nobody listening, Maria would let her fingers remember what they used to do. She would play Chopin and Beethoven and Debussy. She would play the songs her grandmother used to hum. She would play until tears rolled down her cheeks and her whole body ached with a sadness she couldn't name. Then she would close the lid, wipe her eyes, and go home to her tiny apartment. And the next day, she would put on her apron again and pretend that everything was fine. That was Maria's life. Until one Saturday night changed everything. That Saturday started like any other shift. Maria arrived at the restaurant 2 hours early, tied her hair back, put on her apron, and checked the reservation book. That's when she noticed something different. The entire restaurant had been booked out for a private party. One name, one group, and a note from the manager that said, VIP, no mistakes. The man's name was Richard Covington III. Yes, the third. The kind of name that comes with old money, expensive suits, and the belief that the world exists to serve you. He was turning 50 that night, and he had rented out the whole restaurant to celebrate with his closest friends. About 40 guests in total, all of them rich, all of them powerful. All of them used to getting exactly what they wanted. Maria had served people like this before. She knew the type. They didn't look at you when they ordered. They snapped their fingers instead of saying, "Excuse me." They complained about things that weren't actually problems, just to remind everyone that they could. She took a deep breath and told herself what she always told herself. Just get through the night. Smile. Be invisible. Go home. The guests started arriving around 7. Designer dresses, gold watches, perfume so strong you could taste it. They filled the restaurant with loud laughter and louder opinions. Champagne corks popped every few minutes. Maria moved between tables like a ghost, filling water glasses, taking orders, clearing plates. Nobody thanked her. Nobody even looked at her face. Richard Covington himself sat at the center table, surrounded by his closest circle. He was a large man with silver hair and a permanent expression that suggested he found everything slightly beneath him. When Maria brought his appetizer, he waved his hand at her without turning his head, like he was shooing away a fly. She placed the plate down gently and walked away. Just another night. The live music was supposed to be the highlight of the evening. Richard had specifically requested it. He wanted his guests to enjoy fine dining, with a live piano performance, just like in the old classic movies he loved. The restaurant had hired their best pianist for the occasion. a young man named Daniel who played there every weekend. But around 8:30, something went wrong. Maria was in the kitchen when she heard the commotion. Daniel had suddenly become very pale. His hands were shaking. One of the other servers said he had started sweating and looked like he was about to pass out. Food poisoning, someone guessed. Or maybe a stomach flu. Whatever it was, Daniel could barely stand, let alone play piano for 3 more hours. The manager rushed over, panic all over his face. This was a disaster. Richard Covington had paid a small fortune for this party, and live music was part of the deal. Without it, there would be complaints, bad reviews, maybe even a lawsuit. Knowing how people like that operated, they called other pianists. Nobody was available on such short notice. The manager paced back and forth, pulling at his hair, muttering under his breath. The servers watched nervously. Everyone knew that when things went wrong with VIP clients, the staff usually paid the price. Maria stood in the corner of the kitchen, watching all of this unfold. Her heart was beating fast, but not from fear. Something else was happening inside her. A voice she hadn't heard in years, a whisper that said, maybe, just maybe. This was her moment. She tried to push it down. She told herself it was crazy. She was a waitress. She hadn't performed in front of anyone in over a decade. What if she had lost her touch? What if her fingers forgot what to do? What if she embarrassed herself in front of all these people? But the voice wouldn't stop. It kept saying the same thing over and over. You can do this. You know you can do this. Before she could talk herself out of it, Maria walked up to the manager. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. I can play, she said. I can fill in for Daniel. The manager looked at her like she had just spoken in a foreign language. What? I know how to play piano, Maria said, a little louder this time. I can do it. I can play for the rest of the night. The manager opened his mouth to respond, but he never got the chance. Because at that exact moment, Richard Covington appeared in the kitchen doorway. He had come to complain about the delay in music, and he had heard everything. A slow smile spread across his face. But it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who had just found something amusing. Something to laugh at. I'm sorry, Richard said, stepping into the kitchen. Did I just hear that correctly? The waitress wants to play piano? He said the word waitress like it was something dirty, like it was the punchline to a joke everyone should understand. The kitchen went silent. Maria felt her face grow hot. She wanted to take back her words, to disappear, to pretend this had never happened. But it was too late. Richard turned and called out to his guests in the dining room. Everyone, you have to hear this. Our waitress here thinks she can play piano. His voice was loud and theatrical, designed to carry, designed to humiliate. Laughter erupted from the dining room. Maria could hear it washing over her like cold water. People were getting up from their seats, coming closer to see what was happening. She saw their faces, the amusement, the mockery, the absolute certainty that this poor little waitress had lost her mind. One woman in a red dress laughed so hard she nearly spilled her champagne. Oh, this is precious, she said. Does she also think she can perform surgery? Maybe fly a plane? Another man chimed in. Sweetheart, stick to what you know. The breadbasket needs refilling. More laughter. It filled the room, bouncing off the walls, surrounding Maria from every direction. She stood there in her black apron, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. 11 years of being invisible, 11 years of swallowing her pride. And now this. Richard walked closer to her, still wearing that cruel smile. Look. I appreciate the enthusiasm, he said, his voice dripping with fake politeness. But this isn't some talent show at a community center. These are sophisticated people. They expect a certain level of quality. So why don't you go back to doing what you're actually qualified to do, okay? There's a good girl. He patted her on the shoulder like she was a child who had said something silly. Then he turned to walk back to his table. Already done with her. Already moving on to the next thing. But Maria didn't move. Something had shifted inside her. The embarrassment was still there, burning in her chest. But underneath it, something else was rising. Something that had been sleeping for a very long time. She thought about her father. She thought about all those years at the conservatory. She thought about every night she had played alone in this empty restaurant, crying in the darkness because she had lost everything she loved. And she thought about all the people who had ever looked through her like she was nothing. 5 minutes, Maria said. Her voice was calm now, steady. Richard stopped and turned back around. Eyebrows raised. "Give me 5 minutes," she repeated. "If I can't play, I'll leave. I'll quit tonight. But if I can play, you let me finish the evening. That's all I'm asking." The room was quiet. Richard looked at her for a long moment, then shrugged. "Fine," he said with a smirk. "This should be entertaining. Go ahead, waitress. Show us what you've got." He gestured toward the grand piano on the stage, like he was offering her a seat at her own execution. His friends gathered around, phones already out, ready to record what they were sure would be a humiliating failure. Maria walked toward the piano. Her legs felt heavy. Her heart was pounding so loud she could hear it in her ears. She sat down on the bench. The keys stretched out in front of her, black and white, waiting. She closed her eyes. And then she began to play. The piano bench felt cold beneath her. Maria could hear whispers behind her, soft giggles, the click of phone cameras being turned on. Everyone was waiting, waiting for her to fail, waiting for the joke to reach its punchline. Her hands hovered over the keys. For one terrible moment, she felt completely frozen. What was she doing? These hands hadn't performed for an audience in over 11 years. These hands had spent the last decade carrying plates and wiping down tables. What made her think she could just sit down and play like nothing had changed? The doubts crashed over her like waves. She thought about standing up, apologizing, walking away. It would be humiliating, yes, but at least it would be over. At least she wouldn't have to face what came next. But then something happened. She looked down at the keys, and suddenly she wasn't in the restaurant anymore. She was back in that tiny house in the Philippines. She was 4 years old again, touching the piano for the first time. She could smell her grandmother's cooking. She could hear her mother humming in the kitchen. She could feel the magic of those first notes. The way they had filled her whole body with something she couldn't explain. Music had found her when she was just a child. It had chosen her. And no matter how many years had passed, no matter how much life had tried to beat it out of her, that gift was still there. It had never left. It was just waiting. Maria closed her eyes. She took one slow breath, and she let her fingers fall onto the keys. The first notes floated into the air like whispers, soft, gentle, almost shy. It was the opening of Chopin's Ballade. No. 1-inch G minor, one of the most beautiful and most difficult pieces ever written for piano. The same piece she had played for that teacher all those years ago, in her family's small living room, when her whole future had opened up in front of her. For the first few seconds, nobody reacted. The guests were still smirking, still waiting for her to mess up. Richard Covington had his arms crossed, a bored expression on his face. The woman in the red dress was whispering something to her friend, probably some cruel joke about the waitress who thought she could play. But then the music started to build. Maria's fingers moved faster now. The melody grew stronger, more complex. Notes cascaded over each other like water rushing down a mountain. The soft whispers became powerful waves of sound that filled every corner of the room. One by one, the smiles started to fade. The woman in the red dress stopped whispering. Her mouth fell open slightly. The man who had told Maria to refill the breadbasket put down his champagne glass. His eyes fixed on the piano. Even Richard Covington uncrossed his arms. His bored expression slowly transformed into something else. Confusion at first, then disbelief. Maria didn't see any of this. Her eyes were still closed. She wasn't in the restaurant anymore. She was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere the music had taken her. She was playing for her father now. For all those nights he had sat beside her bed when she was sick, singing old songs until she fell asleep. For the way he had cried when she got accepted to the conservatory, for the last words he had whispered to her before he died, apologizing for something that was never his fault. The music swelled. It filled her chest until she thought she might burst. Tears began to slide down her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. She just kept playing. In the audience, something strange was happening. People weren't just listening anymore. They were feeling. The music was reaching inside them, past their expensive clothes and fancy watches, past all the walls they had built around their hearts. It was touching something real, something human. An older man near the back of the room quietly took off his glasses and wiped his eyes. He was thinking about his mother, who had passed away 10 years ago. She used to play piano for him when he was a boy. He hadn't thought about that in so long. A young woman near the window pressed her hand to her chest. She didn't know why, but she suddenly missed her sister, the one she hadn't spoken to in 3 years because of some stupid argument she couldn't even remember anymore. Even Richard Covington felt it. The music was pulling at something deep inside him. Memories he had buried. Regrets he never allowed himself to feel. His jaw tightened, and for just a moment, the mask he always wore slipped. Maria transitioned into a new section of the piece. Her fingers danced across the keys with impossible speed and precision. But it wasn't just technical skill. Any trained pianist could hit the right notes. What Maria had was something different, something rare. She played with her whole soul. Every note carried weight. Every pause meant something. The music breathed and lived and ached. It told a story without words. A story of loss and hope. Of dreams that die. And dreams that refuse to stay dead. It was the story of Maria's life, poured out through her fingertips for everyone to hear. The piece built toward its climax. The notes came faster and faster, louder and louder. Maria's whole body moved with the music now. Her shoulders swayed. Her head tilted back. She was no longer a waitress in a black apron. She was an artist. A force of nature. Something unstoppable. And then, the final notes. They rang out through the silent restaurant, hanging in the air like the last rays of sunlight before darkness. Maria held them for one long moment. Then she slowly lifted her hands from the keys. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. Maria opened her eyes. For a second, she didn't know where she was. The music had taken her so far away that coming back felt almost painful. She looked down at her hands, still trembling slightly. Then she looked up at the room. 40 people stared back at her. But they weren't laughing anymore. They weren't smirking. They weren't reaching for their phones to record a failure. They were crying. Not all of them, but enough. The older man near the back, the young woman by the window, several others scattered throughout the room, tears streaming down faces that had been so cold and mocking just minutes before. And then, slowly, one person started to clap. It was a woman near the middle of the room. She stood up from her chair, still wiping her eyes, and brought her hands together. Once, twice, 3 times. Another person joined her. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire room was on their feet. Applause thundered through the restaurant. Not polite, formal applause. Real applause. The kind that comes from somewhere deep in the gut. The kind you can't fake. People were shouting, cheering. Some were still crying. The woman in the red dress, the same one who had mocked Maria so cruelly, was clapping harder than anyone. Her mascara was running down her cheeks, and she didn't even care. Maria sat frozen on the piano bench. She didn't know what to do. This wasn't something she had prepared for. She had prepared for failure, for humiliation, for walking out of this restaurant and never coming back. She hadn't prepared for this. The applause went on and on. It washed over her like warm water, melting something inside her that had been frozen for 11 years. She thought about all those nights playing alone in the darkness, all those years of being invisible, all those dreams she had buried so deep she thought they were dead. But they weren't dead. They had just been sleeping. And now, finally, they were waking up. Through the crowd, Maria saw Richard Covington. He wasn't clapping. He was just standing there, staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. The arrogance was gone. The cruelty was gone. Something else had taken their place. Slowly, he began walking toward the stage. Maria watched him come closer, her heart pounding. She didn't know what he was going to say. She didn't know if he was going to apologize or make another cruel joke or pretend like nothing had happened. But she knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. The applause slowly faded as Richard Covington reached the edge of the stage. The room fell quiet again. Everyone was watching. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Maria stayed seated on the piano bench. Her hands were still shaking. Her cheeks were still wet with tears. She looked up at this man who had humiliated her in front of everyone just minutes ago. This man who had called her waitress, like it was an insult. This man who had patted her on the shoulder like she was a child. She expected anger. Or maybe more mockery. Maybe he would find some way to twist this moment, to take credit for it, to make himself the center of attention again. That's what people like him usually did, but Richard just stood there. His face looked different somehow. Softer. The sharp edges had melted away. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out at first. He closed it again, swallowed hard, tried again. I don't know what to say. His voice was quiet. Almost humble. It didn't sound like the same man who had laughed at her in the kitchen. That was. He paused, searching for the right words. I've been to concert halls all over the world. Vienna. Paris. New York. I've heard the best pianists alive. And what you just did. He shook his head slowly. I've never heard anything like that. Ever. Maria didn't respond. She didn't know how to respond. This wasn't what she had expected at all. Richard took a deep breath. His eyes dropped to the floor for a moment, like he couldn't quite meet her gaze. When he looked up again, there was something in his expression that surprised her. It almost looked like shame. I owe you an apology, he said. What I said earlier. The way I treated you. It was wrong. It was cruel. And I'm sorry. The room was completely silent. People exchanged glances. This was not the Richard Covington they knew. This was not the man who never apologized for anything, who believed he was always right, who treated everyone beneath his social status like they didn't matter. Maria looked at him for a long moment. Part of her wanted to stay angry. He had humiliated her in front of 40 people. He had called her just a waitress. He had dismissed her, like she was nothing, but another part of her understood something important. Holding on to that anger wouldn't change anything. It would only poison her own heart. And she had spent too many years already with poison in her heart. Thank you, she said softly. I accept your apology. Richard nodded. He seemed relieved, like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. Then he turned to face his guests. I think we can all agree, he said, his voice stronger now, that we just witnessed something extraordinary. And I think we can also agree that I made a complete fool of myself earlier. A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd. So let me make something clear. This woman is not just a waitress. This woman is an artist. A true artist. And I think she deserves to play for us for the rest of the evening. If she's willing, of course. He turned back to Maria with a questioning look. She hesitated for just a second. Then she nodded. The crowd erupted in applause again. But this time, it felt different. Warmer. More welcoming. Like they were inviting her in instead of pushing her out. Maria turned back to the piano. Her heart felt lighter than it had in years. She placed her fingers on the keys and began to play again. This time, she chose something different. Not classical, not Chopin, something with more rhythm, more soul. A jazz piece she had been working on during those lonely nights in the empty restaurant. The music flowed through the room like honey. People started swaying in their seats. Some closed their eyes. Others smiled like they had forgotten how to be pretentious for a moment and were just letting themselves enjoy the music. Maria played for the next 2 hours. She played classical pieces and jazz standards. She played songs she had learned as a child, and melodies she had created herself. The guests barely touched their food. They were too mesmerized to eat. During a short break, people came up to the stage one by one. They wanted to shake her hand. They wanted to tell her how beautiful her playing was. They wanted to know her story. The woman in the red dress approached with tears still in her eyes. She was the same woman who had mocked Maria so cruelly earlier. The same one who had asked if Maria also thought she could perform surgery. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice cracking. "What I said earlier was horrible. I don't know why I said it. I guess I just followed along with everyone else. That's not an excuse. There is no excuse. But I want you to know that what you did tonight changed something in me. I felt things I haven't felt in years." Maria took her hand gently. "We all say things we don't mean sometimes. What matters is that you recognized it. Thank you for telling me." The woman nodded, squeezed Maria's hand, and walked away. Maria watched her go, feeling something warm spreading through her chest. This night was turning into something she never could have imagined, but the most important moment was still to come. Near the end of the evening, a woman approached the stage. She was different from the others. Quieter. More observant. She had been watching Maria all night with a thoughtful expression on her face. She looked to be in her 50s, with short gray hair and kind eyes behind simple glasses. "That was remarkable," the woman said. "Truly remarkable." "Thank you," Maria replied. "That means a lot." The woman smiled. "My name is Victoria Chen. I'm a talent scout for the Chicago Symphony Orchestra." Maria felt her heart skip a beat. She must have heard wrong. "I'm sorry." "Did you say the Chicago Symphony Orchestra?" Victoria repeated. "I came tonight as a guest. Richard's wife is an old friend of mine. Honestly, I wasn't expecting much. These parties are usually boring, rich people showing off." She shrugged. "But then you sat down at that piano, and everything changed." Maria couldn't speak. Her mouth had gone completely dry. Victoria reached into her purse and pulled out a small white card. "This is my direct number. I want you to call me on Monday. We're looking for fresh talent, real talent, and what you have." She shook her head slowly, a look of wonder in her eyes. "What you have is something special, something I've only seen a handful of times in my 30 years in this business." Maria took the card with trembling fingers. She stared at it like it was made of gold, like it might disappear if she blinked. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Things like this don't happen. Not to people like me." Victoria placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Things like this happen to people who deserve them. And from what I saw tonight, you've been deserving for a very long time. The world just hadn't noticed yet." She smiled warmly. "But I noticed. And I don't plan on letting this opportunity slip away. So please, call me Monday." Maria nodded, still unable to find words. Victoria gave her shoulder a small squeeze, then turned and walked back to her table. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Maria played 2 more pieces. Then the party began to wind down. Guests started leaving, many of them stopping to thank her one more time on their way out. Richard Covington himself came by to shake her hand and tell her again how sorry he was. When the last guest finally left and the restaurant fell quiet, Maria sat alone at the piano. The servers were cleaning up around her, but she barely noticed. She was staring at the small white card in her hand. Victoria Chen, Chicago Symphony Orchestra. It didn't feel real. None of it felt real. Just a few hours ago, she had been invisible. Just a waitress. Just another person the world had forgotten about. And now this. Maria pressed the card against her heart and closed her eyes. For the first time in 11 years, she let herself hope. Maybe her story wasn't over after all. Maybe it was just beginning. She thought about her father. About what he would say if he could see her now. She imagined his smile. Wide and proud. The way it used to be. When she played for him as a little girl. "I didn't give up, Papa," she whispered into the empty room. "I didn't give up." And somewhere, In a place beyond the reach of time and distance, she could almost hear him whisper back, "I know, my darling. I always knew you wouldn't." Maria called Victoria Chen on Monday morning. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped the phone twice. Part of her still expected this to be some kind of joke. A cruel trick. Maybe she would call and Victoria wouldn't remember her. Maybe she would laugh and hang up. But that's not what happened. Victoria answered on the second ring. She sounded genuinely happy to hear from Maria. They talked for almost an hour. Victoria asked about her background, her training, her years at the conservatory. Maria told her everything. The scholarship, the dreams, her father's illness, the years of working as a waitress while her gift gathered dust. When she finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "You've been through so much," Victoria said quietly. "Most people would have given up. But you didn't. You kept that fire alive, even when everything was trying to put it out. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are." 2 weeks later, Maria auditioned for the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. She played in a grand hall with perfect acoustics and velvet seats that stretched back into darkness. 3 judges sat in the front row, their faces giving nothing away. Maria was terrified. Her palms were sweating, her heart was racing. But when she sat down at the piano, something familiar took over. The same feeling she had felt that night at the restaurant, the same connection to something bigger than herself. She played Chopin again, the same piece that had changed everything. And when she finished, one of the judges was wiping her eyes. She got the position, not as a lead performer. Not yet. But as a member of the orchestra. With the opportunity to grow, to learn, to prove herself. It was more than she had ever dared to hope for. But something else happened too. Something Maria never expected. Remember that night at the restaurant? Remember all those phones that came out when she sat down at the piano? All those people ready to record her failure? Well, they recorded something else instead. One of the guests had captured the entire performance on video. 8 minutes of Maria playing Chopin like her life depended on it. 8 minutes of tears and triumph and music that seemed to come from another world. He posted it online a few days after the party. He didn't think much of it at first. Just wanted to share something beautiful he had witnessed. Within a week, the video had 1 million views. Within a month, it had 20 million. The story spread like wildfire. News stations picked it up. Newspapers wrote articles about it. The headline was always some version of the same thing. Waitress silences mocking crowd with stunning piano performance. People couldn't get enough of it. They watched the video over and over. They cried every time. They shared it with their friends and family and coworkers. They wrote comments about how it had touched them, how it had reminded them of their own buried dreams, how it had made them believe in second chances. Maria became famous almost overnight. Interview requests flooded in. Talk shows wanted her as a guest. Record labels reached out about potential albums. It was overwhelming. It was terrifying. It was wonderful. But through all of it, Maria stayed grounded. She remembered where she came from. She remembered what it felt like to be invisible. And she made a promise to herself that she would never forget. 6 months after that night at the restaurant, Maria performed her debut concert at Symphony Center in downtown Chicago. It was one of the most prestigious concert halls in the country. Thousands of people bought tickets. The show sold out in less than an hour. Maria stood backstage before the performance, looking at herself in the mirror. She was wearing a beautiful black gown. Her hair was done up elegantly. She looked like a completely different person from the waitress in the black apron, but inside, she was still the same Maria. Still the little girl from the Philippines, who had touched piano keys for the first time and felt magic. Still the daughter who had held her father's hand as he took his last breath. Still the woman who had played alone in empty restaurants, crying in the darkness, refusing to let her dreams die. There was a knock on the door. A stagehand poked his head in. 5 minutes, Miss Maria. Are you ready? She took a deep breath. I'm ready. The walk to the stage felt like the longest walk of her life. She could hear the crowd on the other side of the curtain. Thousands of people. All waiting for her. All believing in her. But before she stepped out, she paused and looked at the front row. There were 15 seats there, roped off with a small sign. Maria had made a special request to the event organizers. Those seats were reserved. Not for celebrities. Not for wealthy donors. Not for important people in fancy clothes. Those seats were for service workers, waitresses, busboys, janitors, cleaners. People who worked hard every day and never got recognized for it. People who might be carrying their own secret dreams. Just like Maria had carried hers. She had invited them personally, gone to restaurants and hotels and office buildings around the city, told them about the concert, told them those seats were theirs, free of charge, told them they deserved to see something beautiful. Now they sat in the front row, looking up at the stage, with wonder in their eyes. Some of them had never been to a concert hall before. Some of them had never worn formal clothes before. But they were here, and they mattered. Maria stepped onto the stage. The applause was deafening. It washed over her like a wave, warm and powerful and full of love. She walked to the piano, her beautiful grand piano, shining under the spotlight. She sat down on the bench. She placed her fingers on the keys. The room fell silent. Maria closed her eyes. She thought about her grandmother's old piano in that tiny house with the leaky roof. She thought about her mother crying with wonder as she watched her daughter play. She thought about her father's tired eyes, his last whispered words, his hand growing cold in hers. She thought about every night she had spent alone in that dark restaurant, playing for no one, crying for everything she had lost. And she thought about this moment, this impossible, miraculous moment that she had earned through years of pain and perseverance and refusing to give up. She opened her eyes. She looked out at the crowd, at the service workers in the front row, at all the faces filled with hope and expectation, and she began to play. The music filled the concert hall like light filling a dark room. It soared to the ceiling and swept across the seats and wrapped around every single person there. It told the story of a little girl with magic in her fingers. A woman who lost everything. A waitress who refused to be invisible. By the time she finished, half the audience was in tears. The standing ovation lasted for 7 minutes. People cheered and shouted and clapped until their hands hurt. But Maria wasn't looking at the crowd anymore. She was looking at the empty space beside her. The space where she imagined her father sitting, smiling that proud smile, tears of wonder in his eyes. "I did it, Papa," she whispered. "I finally did it." And as the applause thundered around her, Maria smiled. Not because she was famous now, not because she had money or success or recognition. She smiled because she had learned something important, something that had taken her whole life to understand. Your circumstances don't define you. Your job title doesn't define you. The people who look down on you don't get to decide your worth. You are more than what the world sees. You are more than what you do to survive. And your dreams, no matter how deeply buried, never really die. They just wait for you to find the courage to let them live again.